Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this great CLE presentation on food assistance and eligibility programs as part of Hunger Relief Awareness Week. This is day 4, I think, and on behalf of the Generation Generosity Committee, we really just want to thank all of you who have watched the CLEs, who've participated in all the programs this week. And just as sort of a general overview, on Tuesday, we had a great nonprofit roundtable with 5 incredible women who advocate from a wide spectrum of hunger needs. And Wednesday, we had a great virtual community service program where we decorated lunch bags, which will be donated to kids' meals. And yesterday, we spoke with Ms. Ramya Ravi Shankar, who gave us a CLE presentation on food policy, namely the FEED Act, and how there's new sort of legislation being proposed to help remedy the inequities with food accessibility in our country. And tomorrow, our last event is going to be an in-service volunteer opportunity with kids' meals. We'll be making sandwiches, packing lunches, which will be delivered to children all across the greater Houston area. So thanks to those of you who've signed up. There's plenty of spots left. So if you're interested, contact myself, Miriam, or Lucy Kane. Today, we have 2 great attorneys, seasoned attorneys who are experienced in the public benefits legal space, Mr. Jeff Larsen and Mr. Darrell Steidley. We're very lucky to have them, and they're going to be talking to us about generally about food assistance programs here in Texas, how people qualify for them, for those who may have those those benefits denied, what the appeals process looks like, and it'll be a really great conversation. We've gotten a lot of information this week, so a lot of you might be wondering, now what do I do with all this info? And so today we'll learn how we as attorneys can use our skills to advocate for folks who are seeking SNAP benefits, WIC benefits, etc. So to introduce our speakers, I'm going to hand it off to Miriam Anna. So thanks, Miriam.
Thank you, Nidia. My name is Miriam. I am an attorney with Lone Star Legal Aid, and I am very excited to introduce my colleagues today. A little bit about Lone Star Legal Aid. We are a 501c3 nonprofit law firm with the mission to protect and advance the civil legal rights of millions of Texans living in poverty by providing free advocacy, legal representation, and community education that ensures equal access to justice. We are the 4th largest legal aid organization of its type in the United States. LSLA has a proud tradition of client-centered work, and historically the firm has won victories affecting clients as well as groups of low-income people on the community, state, and national level. We serve millions of people in over 70 counties in various regions of Texas and a couple of counties in Arkansas. Lone Star focuses resources on maintaining, enhancing, and protecting income and economic stability. A big portion of that is the work that the attorneys speaking today are advancing. We also work on preserving housing, improving outcomes for children, and assisting populations with special vulnerabilities, including veterans, individuals with disabilities, elderly, homeless, or limited English proficiency members of our community. You can visit our website, lonestarlegal.org. During the COVID pandemic, we launched an intake that operates 24/7 on this website. After today's presentation, if you're also interested in volunteering and accepting a variety of types of cases, including the ones covering today, you can also go to volunteer. There's a tab on the website as well. Because of the COVID pandemic, there has been a dramatic increase in the loss of wages, the need for legal assistance in housing, family law, and public benefits, today's topic. Jeff and Darrell have a combined 58 years of experience practicing law. Jeff is a graduate of the University of Texas School of Law. He has worked as an attorney for Lone Star Legal Aid since 1994 in the public benefits section. Over the past 21 years, he has represented clients in hundreds of administrative hearings before the Social Security Administration, the Texas Health and Human Services Commission, and the Texas Workforce Commission. He also has extensive appellate experience, having written briefs for many appeals to the Social Security Appeals Council, State Court, Federal District Court, as well as the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Darrell is a graduate of St. Mary's School of Law. Before joining Lone Star Legal Aid in 2015, he practiced in civil litigation for over 15 years, first with the Steidley O'Neill law firm, and then his own solo practice before joining Fry, Steidley, Oaks, and Benavides as a partner. As staff counsel for Lone Star Legal Aid, he has worked at the Central Intake Unit for over 4 years before joining the Public Benefits Unit in January of 2020. And Jeff and Darrell, if y'all want to start by talking a little bit more generally about your specific units before diving into the subject, we'd also love to hear about that. And thank you again, everyone, for being here today. And without further delay, Jeff and Darrell, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Jeff Larsen. What Miriam really meant to say about all this experience stuff is I'm old. I've been doing public benefits for 26 years. Generally, that includes food stamps, but also Social Security, SSI, Medicaid, Medicare, unemployment, and indigent health care. I have a particular interest in trying to make sure that people can get health care of some kind. And in Texas, that's a very patchwork system. But that's not our subject today. Today, we're going to talk about food stamps, which is one of the major sources of income support and just generally help to live for poor people in Texas. The benefits are high enough that it really is worthwhile for a lot of people to do. And we're going to spend most of our time looking at the Texas Works Handbook. This is the internal rules for the Texas Health and Human Services Commission, which is the agency that administers food stamps in Texas. Food stamps is a federal program. It's governed by federal regulations and statutes. The statute is 7 USC section 2011 and following. The regulations are at 7 CFR section 271 and following, mainly in section 273. But almost every question can be determined initially by looking at the handbook. Very rarely do we challenge what's in the handbook by trying to show that there's some conflict with the statute or the regulations. It's an unusual case and probably not something that you would end up doing when you first look at food stamps. So let's look at a little bit at the Texas Works Handbook. It starts off in Part A with determining eligibility. There are a whole bunch of other parts, Part A, Part B, Part C, Part D, etc. But Part A is the basic rules about food stamps. So let's start by looking at household composition. And we're going to look at A231. So we'll have to scroll down to that. Where do we get? Okay. I'm having some not quite as it's kind of a clunky system, but let's find A231 to talk about who has to be in a food stamp case. Well, that does not seem to be looking right. When I looked it up last night, oh, that's because I'm looking at the wrong section. Okay, back to, okay. Part A, determining eligibility, household composition, and 231, who is included? Now, the sections of the Texas Works Handbook, some refer to TANF, some refer to Medicaid, and some refer to food stamps, which is called SNAP. SNAP is an acronym, Simplified Nutritional Assistance Program. So when it says SNAP, that means food stamps. So the following people must be certified. They have to be part of the same household for a food stamp case: parents and children who are age 21 or younger if they live in the same household. Usually we think of children as being up to 18, but for this purpose, it goes up to age 21 until they turn 22. There are specific rules about a child under age 18 who has parental control over a younger child can apply separately. But normally parents and children have to be part of the same household. Spouses, if they live together, have to be part of the same household. They cannot apply separately. And if one spouse applies, they are applying for the whole household. And we're going to consider the income of the children and the spouse, if they have any. There are specific rules about who is not included. Doesn't include roomers, live-in attendants, boarders, ineligible students. There's some very specific rules about students. You could generally assume that high school students are going to be included in the household. College students, generally not, although there's some, as I said, fairly complicated rules at section B410 that we're not going to go over right now. People who live in an institution are not part of the household. There's some rules about when people become part of the household. And then in section 8232, we talk about certain people that are disqualified, who cannot get SNAP, who cannot be part of the household, even if they live in the same house. That would include fugitives, people who are fleeing to avoid prosecution. There's some history there that I won't go into. People with certain felony drug convictions, and that's all defined right here, but if your client has a felony drug conviction or two, you might want to look at that. People who've been disqualified by intentional program violations, that's a kind of fraud case where the Food Stamp Office applies an administrative penalty for intentional program violations. That makes the person ineligible. People who have not cooperated with the food stamp employment and training procedures, which are designed to put adults into work if it's possible. People who don't cooperate with getting a Social Security number, and very notably, ineligible aliens. So one question that people sometimes get confused about is all those aliens getting all those damn food stamps. Well, no, aliens do not get food stamps. People who are undocumented are not part of a food stamp household. They can't get food stamps. Now, if mom is undocumented and she has 3 US citizen children, she may be able to get food stamps for those children. And you might possibly see that mother using her food stamp card to buy food, presumably for those children. That is permitted under the food stamp program. There's also, SNAP is not usually generally available to able-bodied adults without dependents, ABODs. That is people who are adults who do not have children and who are between 18 and 50. So generally those people can get 3 months of benefits and then no more. And that rule was on hold during the COVID crisis. And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure whether they have stopped that exemption as of November 2nd when they made some other changes, or whether they haven't. I want to be frank about what I don't know. But when someone is not part of the household, their income may nevertheless be considered part of the household, like undocumented people. Their income is prorated in, and there's very specific rules about how they count the income, for example, of the undocumented mother or father when you're trying to get benefits for the child. So if you have that kind of case, you have to look up those rules. Next, that's just the basic idea of who gets food stamps. I want to look also at, and along that same line, there's an appendix at, let's see, 121. This is the gross income limits for food stamps, for SNAP. For a household of one, if your gross income is over $1,383 in a month, you're generally not eligible for any amount of food stamps. Zero. Okay? So this is poor people. This rule does not apply to people who are disabled or elderly. For them, this gross income limit does not apply, and we go on and do some other calculations. But for anyone who doesn't fit into that disabled or elderly category, these limits absolutely apply. And the gross income limit there, 1,383, is the absolute maximum gross income per month that a person could have and still get food stamps. So for example, a mother and two children, where none of them is disabled, has a gross income limit of $2,353 per month. Any income over that, they're disqualified. They don't get any food stamps. Now, let's go back to, we did household composition. We talked about who's disqualified. In terms of immigration status, I wanted to point out there's this whole section on citizenship and immigration issues, and I wanted to point out one particular issue. Generally, the individual is required to verify their immigration status by providing up-to-date, valid USCIS documents. And when they apply, if they don't have that, they're given 10 days to get that. If any of you have ever done anything with immigration law, you know that 10 days is not long enough to get anything from the Immigration Service. You might get it in 6 months, is my general impression, and that's a definite maybe. But there is one particular part under A314. One of the most frequent issues that comes up is people who have permanent residence, and people who are legal permanent residents in the United States, allowed to live here indefinitely. Their cards expire every couple of years, and they have to get a new one. If that card is expired, I want you to look at this exception. If the individual's USCIS document is expired and the SAVE response, that's an internal HHSC program, they can check with USCIS what is the status of that person, shows that the individual is a legal permanent resident and the date admitted to response is indefinite, then they meet the criteria and they are eligible for food stamps, even though they do not have an up-to-date card. This is an issue that comes up fairly frequently in our office because the general rule is that people have to verify by producing their documentation that is valid and up to date. But there is this exception, and sometimes the workers sort of miss that exception and don't see it. And we do an appeal, and we win. And it's usually about that simple. Next thing I wanted to look at is back to section A410, if I can get there. Generally, notice that there's a section up here that talks about all programs except this. All applicant, that includes SNAP. All applicants must provide a Social Security number or apply for one before certification unless they meet one of the criteria in this section. Of course, undocumented aliens are not required to apply for a Social Security number, but then they can't get food stamps. Certain non-applicants are not required to provide Social Security number. That is, when you fill out a a food stamp application, you will fill out one part of the form where it lists everybody that you're applying for food stamps for, who's going to be in this household. And then there's another part of the form that asks you who else lives in the house besides that. Those other people do not have to provide Social Security verification because they're not going to get the food stamps anyway. children 6 months or younger are not required to provide proof of an application for a social security number. And that's the basic rules for providing a social security card. This does come up fairly frequently, and it is frequently an obstacle. Not everybody has a valid social security number on hand, easily accessible. Let's go to A661. Did I get that right? 621. Oh, there we go. Verification sources. For each kind of verification that HHSC requires for food stamps, there is generally a list of kinds of documents that might be accepted for that verification. So for verifying your identification, that is who you are, they prefer a driver's license or DPS ID card. But you can also use a birth certificate, hospital or birth records, adoption records, work or school ID card, voter registration card, blah, 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 blah. It goes on. It's a long list, right? The point that I want to make here is that, like many other kinds of verification, and this is frequently an issue in food stamp cases, the worker will generally ask for something at the top of the list, like a driver's license. If the applicant does not have a driver's license and does not respond in any way, their application will be denied because they didn't provide the verification that was requested. But it's pretty easy for the applicant to say, you know, I don't have a driver's license. What else can I use? And at that point, it is up to HHSC to go, well, let's see, do you have a birth certificate? Do you have birth records from the hospital? Do you have a voter registration card? Blah, blah, blah. So applicants should never fail to respond to a request for verification. If you fail to respond, you lose. But if you at least tell them, I can't provide this, here's why, what else can I do? That puts you in a winning position. A lot of times they don't even bother to tell you what else you can do, or they make some mistake and don't properly explain to you what other verifications you can do. So this is an issue where sometimes we can win a case where they say you failed to provide proper verification, depending on what the client did. Let's go back. And the next thing I wanted to point out is A710 residence. You have to reside in Texas. You don't have to have a permanent dwelling or fixed residence. You can be living under a bridge. And specifically with regard to SNAP, anybody who lives here for any purpose other than a vacation meets the residency requirement regardless of the length of time they have been here or plan to stay. This is a US constitutional issue. The Supreme Court decided a case many, many years ago, and I don't remember the name of the case, but we can look it up if we need to, where they said states are not allowed to limit public benefits depending on how long you have resided in the state. Residence is a question of intent. We all know that from law school, right? So if you moved to Texas yesterday and you intend to stay here for any period of time, it's not a vacation, then you reside in Texas and you're eligible for food stamps in terms of your residence. They can't say you haven't been here long enough. That also applies to every other kind of public benefits. TANF, Medicaid, indigent health care. I've done cases about that and had to point out there's a Supreme Court case. It's a constitutional issue. Let's go on to, we're going to skip a number of sections that mainly have to do with Medicaid. We're going to look at section A1220 under resources. Now, one of the things I want you to notice when I'm zipping around in this Texas Works Handbook is how easy it is to find everything. You have a resource question? Well, look under resources, okay? It will answer your question. So under 1220, a household's countable resources plus excess vehicle value must be $5,000 or less. Okay. Now, there's some exceptions to what's counted as resources. They do not count up to $7,500 cash value of a prepaid burial insurance policy, so long as it meets their criteria for that. They don't count up to $15,000 of the fair market value of the highest valued countable vehicle. Okay. They don't count up to $4,650 fair market value for other countable vehicles, although there's a whole policy about how they count vehicles and so forth. You can't have an unlimited number of vehicles, but you can have one pretty decent car. There has been a recent proposal to reduce the maximum value of a vehicle that doesn't count, that's exempt from the resource requirements, to $4,650. I would look at you and go, okay, well, a lot of these people are going to be required to go to work. Will $4,650 buy you a vehicle that's going to dependably get you to work every day? Okay, that's why this limit was increased many years ago to $15,000, and it avoids a whole lot of litigation in terms of appeals and so forth about the value of cars.
And Jeff, I had just a quick question. So it's a two-pronged test. It's looking to qualify. It's looking at gross income, but also looking at additional resources that the household has. So it's these two sort of tests that to prove that you qualify. Is that right?
It's pretty close. That's the basic idea. Yes, there's income and there's resources. Income is what you get during a month, what you get in during a month. Money coming in during the month is income. Any money that you carry over from one month to the next is a resource. That would include things like land and money in the bank, money buried in a PVC pipe out in the woods, money under your mattress, money invested somewhere. That's all resources. There are exceptions. Your homestead, no matter how valuable, is exempt. So you could live in a house in River Oaks and, worth $4 million. And if you are otherwise eligible, you could qualify for food stamps. I don't have any clients like that, actually, because there's also, generally people that have that much in the way of valuable land would also have other resources that would make them ineligible. But the homestead itself is exempt. It is not part of the resource limits. And like we said, you can have a car, maybe more than one car, depending on the value. And then there's this whole other income limit. The income limit, there is a gross income limit that applies to most people, but even if you don't fall, even if you are not caught by that gross income limit because you're disabled or elderly, there's still an income limit because the food stamp program uses your income to calculate how much you're eligible for, even if you don't have that gross income limit. And if you have too much income, you don't qualify for any, regardless of disability or age. So let's look a little bit at income limits. I think did we already cover that? Pretty much. Let's go 1,300 anyway. We'll just cover it again. And my note says we want to look at 1310, the general policy. Income is basically any kind of payment. There's earned income. This reference to MAGI is the way that they count income based on income tax returns for Medicaid. And that's a whole different program. Income is counted in an entirely different way for Medicaid. And that's what that MAGI reference is to. There's earned income, unearned income, and so forth. They count the income of any member of the household, etc. I think that's all we really wanted to cover there. After they look at your income, they make certain deductions when they do this calculation to calculate how much you might be eligible for. SNAP households, notice that there's this section about TANF. That's a whole different program. We're not going to apply that. But SNAP households have the following deductions, or may have: a 20% earned income deduction for households with earnings from work, a standard deduction. I don't remember what that is off the top of my head. Darrell, do you remember? $350 or something along that lines? It depends on the size of the household, and I don't remember off the top of my head. There's a deduction for medical costs for household members who are elderly or have a disability. Now, if you're not elderly or disabled, you don't get to take a medical expenses deduction. But if you are, you can take that deduction if your regular medical expenses are more than $35 per month that you have to pay. So a lot of our clients, for example, have Medicaid, and they don't really have much in the way of medical costs because Medicaid pays for pretty much everything. But others do. Medicaid doesn't always, for example, pay for transportation to and from the doctor, may not pay for certain medications, even if you do have Medicaid. A lot of people who don't have Medicaid have very high amounts of medical expenses, and this is frequently an issue that we file an appeal about because HHSC workers often forget to take into account the medical expenses deduction. There's a deduction for dependent care. We don't see a whole lot of those. There's a deduction for child support that is paid to someone outside the household. There's a homeless shelter deduction for people who are homeless. There is such a thing as a plan for achieving self-sufficiency, but I can't remember ever dealing with one of those. It's one of those ways to try to get people to work that doesn't really work very well, and we don't really mess with it very much. We're going to skip a couple of more sections that we don't really need to look at. And we're going to look at employment services and look specifically at section 1822. If I can find it. There's a whole bunch of codes that tell you for SNAP, well, that's choices. Choices is a TANF employment program. We're going to get to 1822. EMT, Employment and Training, is the food stamp program that adults are required to participate in if they are not disabled. If you're disabled, you don't have to participate in this. Generally, if you're disabled, you just get a little letter from your doctor. It's a simple little one-page form. Maybe it's 2 pages, I forget. The doctor checks off that you're disabled either temporarily or indefinitely. And HHSC generally does not question that determination if your doctor says it. Of course, you have doctors who won't check that off. Well, I can't do anything about that. Maybe they think you're not disabled. Could be, I don't know. But if you can get your doctor to check off that you are disabled, then you don't have to participate in this employment and training program. Until November 2nd, during the COVID crisis, nobody had to participate in the employment training program because of COVID. But as of November 2nd, they've reinstated it because, well, I don't know why. I don't know, but they did. Our state government has decided, as far as I know, that all of a sudden that is going to apply again, and people will be able to be sanctioned or denied benefits if they don't participate in the employment and training program. That basically involves going to the Texas Workforce Commission and participating in a special program that they designed just for food stamp applicants. It is not enough that somebody has been trying to get work through TWC anyway. I've had clients who, on their own, were trying to find work through Texas Workforce Commission, but they didn't go through the ENT program at TWC. So they were sanctioned and barred from participation for some period of time. Okay. You have to do their particular little program. So here's all the codes where you're exempt. A, you're a child, you're physically or mentally unfit, you're 60 or older, you're caring for a child under age 6. Okay. So mothers with children under age 6 don't have to do this. Caring for a person with a disability who's living in the home. You're in a drug or alcohol treatment program. You're getting unemployment benefits, or you are full-time employed. Unfortunately, our minimum wage is so low that there are a lot of people who work full-time and are nevertheless so poor that they're able to get food stamps, depending on the size of their house and how many people are working and so forth. But you have to work not quite full-time, but at least 30 hours a week.
And Jeff, speaking of the numbers as far as like income and this continuing conversation about eligibility, did you still want to show us an example of calculating these numbers before we?
Yes, absolutely. We're getting out of time, right?
Okay, right.
Let me see if I can. Lone Star Legal Aid has a little calculator that I'm not going to give you, but I will show you if I can find my way to it. Is this going to work? Probably not. Nope. I don't know if I can get to our calculator. I don't think I can get there. I don't think I can get there through this.
Okay.
No
worries.
They're fixing it right now.
Our program is, our database program is shut down these days, so there's no point in me even trying to get there because I can't get through to it.
No problem. No worries. I figured
normally,
if we had a bit of time.
Normally we have a beautiful little program where you can enter about 6 or 8 bits of data. You remember the things that I mentioned as counting it and all the deductions and how they count income, and all that is set into the computer program. And as long as you know what all those words mean, for example, it starts off with how many people are in that. Is anyone disabled or elderly? Well, you have to know the definitions of disabled or elderly. Then it asks how many people are in the household. Well, you have to know who has to be in a household, who can't be in a household. So you have, if it's just mom and 2 children and they're all 3 US citizens, well, it's a household of 3. But there are much more complicated cases where, because of citizenship or other issues like drug convictions or whatever, there may be fairly complicated issues about who's part of the household.
Hey,
but anyway,
I have it up. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yes. Can you do that?
I can. It's the one I use. It's not the one that's.
Okay, that's not the way it looks for me, but that is our estimator.
Right.
So you can just fill in little bits of information here. So like, do you have income from work? Self-employment, other income like Social Security, child support, unemployment, blah, blah, blah. But that includes any other income. You have to understand these sort of terms of art. But at the bottom of it, it calculates how much your food stamps are, and it's 1 page. I can do it 5 times in 20 minutes. And it's real useful, partly because by using this, we can look at alternatives. We can advise somebody, for example, well, right now you're getting this much food stamps, and that is accurately calculated, if it is, or it's not. But if you, for example, changed your living arrangements so that you were paying a utility bill, that would greatly increase your food stamp eligibility, and you would be able to get this much. Now, of course, you'd have to pay the utility bill, but in many cases, you get more out of the food stamp program by paying, say, your natural gas bill than you would pay for the natural gas bill.
Right. I had a client where we did put in travel to and from the doctor, pharmacy, and prescriptions to get over the $35 medical, which that takes an additional $350 off your income. Just that $35. And so that jumped it from 74 to 122.
So it's a real useful tool, but I don't think we can share that with you except just to have a look at it. We'd be happy to use it for you if you're doing a case and want to go through it.
Right.
At this point, I think I'm going to let this go. I had thought about presenting something else, but I think I've covered most of it. Oh, I do need to cover Snapcap. In addition to the regular SNAP program, let me get to, where is it? B475.
Well, and I think we're looking at Darrell's screen because I think he was going to shift into the appeals process, but okay, maybe I'm looking at the.
No, it was up there.
It was
getting ready to switch over.
I was about to let Darrell start, but I couldn't quite do it.
Yeah, maybe we can come back to Snapcap at the end if we already have Darrell's share screen up, like with the appeals.
Go ahead, Darrell.
Okay, cool.
Okay. All right. So now let's say you've applied for food stamps, or you're getting food stamps and you get notice that they're being reduced or perhaps even being canceled. And we're going to go through the appeals process. Before I do that, Jeff and I both want, if we take nothing else from today, dialing 211, which is an option for anybody, especially during COVID. You get local resources on healthcare, utilities, food stamps, housing, and more. So if you don't remember anything, dialing 211 in the state of Texas allows you access to many resources for people that we serve. Okay, so let's go into the appeals. So how do you contact the appeals division? Well, you can, as I said, dial 211, or you can dial the direct number to the appeals division. And all this information is online on the HHS website, the Fair and Fraud Hearings Handbook. Okay, so how do you file an appeal? If you receive a notice of agency action, instructions for requesting appeal are included on the notice. If not, you may contact 211 or the person's caseworker. But let's talk about that for a second, because we get a fair amount of cases where our clients don't get the notice. And Jeff knows this, and this is typically one of the questions we ask. When did you get the notice? Because that will also kick in on the deadline to file the appeal, which is 90 days. So if you haven't gotten any notice, and that does happen, then that's something that can be argued even if you're outside the 90-day window. We can sometimes gather that back up and put it back in. You're going to have what's called a good cause hearing, right, to show you have good cause for filing that appeal outside the deadline. And then after that, if that's ruled in your favor, then you get to go back to square one and talk about your benefits. Okay.
With regard to the appeal deadline, it's really important to note that if you are certified for benefits and they are reduced or denied, if you file an appeal within 10 days, you have a constitutional right to continue getting benefits, Goldberg versus Kelly, ongoing benefits,
right,
during the appeal. And for many people, this is extremely important because the appeal may take a couple of months or more. So you always want to file that appeal within 10 days if possible.
That's a great point, Jeff. Now, how will you participate? So for people that are maybe thinking about doing one of these cases, all done by telephone, you're going to be contacted. You'll contact the caseworker. They need to provide you with what we call an evidence packet, so you can review the evidence that they're relying on in making their decision. So just for example, I had a gentleman who was receiving $125 a month. He got notice that his food stamps were being reduced to 74. We filed the appeal early, like Jeff said, but we filed it When I finally got the evidence packet, what it showed clearly is when they had the cost of living adjustment, because when Social Security does a COLA, right, then they do a restructure of what your food stamps should be, because now you're getting paid more money, right? So if you're on Social Security or disability or whatever, that's all rolling in. So, but what also happens, and the hearing officer was familiar with this, so I guess it happens frequently, when they do the COLA roll, it kicks off some of the deductions. So it had kicked out his medical deduction, and that's what had reduced his food stamps. So it was easy to see they weren't doing it automatically. They weren't going back affirmatively and saying, okay, this is a problem. They know it is there. So you had to actually appeal, but we got his benefits back, and he got his back benefits that he was missing. So when will you receive a decision? You typically, it can't take longer than 90 days, 60 days for SNAP from the date of the request for an appeal to issue a decision. There are circumstances that could result in extension, but we try to stay on top of these appeals, because it is, if they're not receiving the benefits, it's very difficult for our clients, because unfortunately, many times we get people that just show up after the 10-day period. They haven't been able to contact it. If you get a negative decision from the hearings officer, you're not done yet, right? You can file what's called an administrative review, and that's the review of the hearing record by a Health and Human Services Commission attorney. The hearing officer does not have to be an attorney. The attorney will issue a new decision after reviewing the record. So we recently had one overturned. There was an overpayment of $11,000 that the hearing officer ruled against our client. And then we have an attorney, Shannon Guidry, wrote that administrative review, and the reviewing attorney agreed with her position that her evidence was much more probative, gave more weight to what evidence they had versus the circumstantial evidence that the state put up. So it is a valuable tool, and that person does not have to pay that $11,000 as alleged. Okay. If during the review of the case prior to the hearing, program staff discover an error, they can correct that at any time. If you provide additional information that was not previously provided, you should receive a notice in response. I just want to make sure that the record, everybody understands that the record is going to be that they have received the new evidence that you sent them. If your case has been denied, you have the right to reapply and have your circumstances considered while waiting for the fair hearing. This does not affect the outcome of the fair hearing. So that's important. The hearing officer may schedule a pre-hearing conference if necessary to resolve issues before the hearing. What kind of issues, Jeff, like before the hearing, do you think would have to be resolved?
I don't remember ever really having a pre-hearing conference. Occasionally they call and say something like, oh, well, we have to reschedule this
Right.
hearing or something. But usually it's pretty much like clockwork. You file your appeal, and a few weeks later you get a notice when the hearing is going to be. You call in for the hearing and you do the hearing over the phone.
So you prepare for the hearing like you would for any other hearing, right? If you have any documents that you get from your client or that you're able to secure that you think is relevant evidence, then you need to produce that for the hearings officer. It has been, during the COVID, everything's been different. And sometimes we're not getting our evidence packets as far in advance as we would like, but it hasn't really affected our efficiency with that, so that's good. You can bring an interpreter. You can bring your child to assist you with the case if they need to. If they're a Spanish speaker and the child is bilingual, then you can do that. And that's probably going to be on the phone. If you don't understand the hearing officer's decision, they have a phone number you can call. It's probably the ombudsman number if you do not understand the decision. You can't speak to the hearing officer before the hearing, okay? Or after the hearing, but before issuing a written decision. That ensures a fair, unbiased.
Yeah, if you need to communicate with the hearing officer, the hearing packet will give you a phone number for the hearing officer, but when you call that phone number, you're just going to talk to their secretary. So it's sort of an arm's length conversation. You might need to call the hearing officer, for example, to say, well, you scheduled this hearing for this date and I can't do it on that date. Can we reschedule?
Right.
Or
now,
to try to discuss some procedural issue, but you really don't want to try to talk to them about any substantive issue outside of the hearing.
But getting back to the 10-day continuation of benefits, you always have to understand that, yes, you can still continue to receive your benefits. But if you end up with a negative result, they're going to want that money back. Okay, so if you appeal within 10 days and you continue to get your food stamps and you have a negative outcome, you're going to have an outstanding balance, an overpayment. Okay, so your client, they always need to know that that is a risk. Okay, and as I talked about before, 90 days from the denial. If the agency took action on your case, is a managed care organization, and that's more to deal with Medicare. You have 120 days to request a fair hearing.
That would be a Medicaid case, not
right.
food stamps.
Correct.
I wanted to mention two things. One, Darrell mentioned that you can bring your own interpreter, which you certainly can, but they are required to provide an interpreter if you let them know you need one, both at the local office for interviews and for the hearing. And this is frequently an issue. They're also required, at least theoretically, to provide written notices in your own language. They're pretty good at providing notices in Spanish. Once you get past Spanish, if you speak Vietnamese or Karenni or some other language, you're probably not going to get any notices, and that is a frequent litigation issue.
But we are litigating against a county that doesn't even supply Spanish notifications. So that's another litigation entirely. But all right. So if you don't attend the hearing, it's going to be dismissed. You have 30 days from that date to show good cause why you couldn't get there. You got in a car wreck, or you were in the hospital, you had to go to the emergency room, whatever. Those are all going to be probably seen as good cause. But if not, and then what happens if you get done with the hearing and then you feel like you forgot an important piece of evidence to tell the hearing officer? You can mail the additional information to the hearing officer listed on the notice of hearing. Okay, Jeff, we're getting right up to the end. Is there anything you want to close with?
I would just point out that after the review to the regional attorney, that
right.
appeal after the initial appeal,
right.
It is possible to appeal to state district court in Austin. That's where the sort of final appeal would go. But it's a substantial evidence review, and it's only been done a few times.
That's a high bar.
Yeah, it's a very difficult kind of an appeal to win. In general, in my opinion, I've done a couple and still have a bitter taste in my mouth. They're not easy, and you would pick that case very carefully. They're not common. What would be another appeals issue? You can appeal any action or inaction by HHSC. So the scope of appeal is very broad. Anything basically that you want to appeal, you can appeal it. I'm very wary of filing appeals through the 211 phone system.
Yeah.
Because they will try to convince you that you're just filing a complaint. And complaints have an entirely different format. They don't get you a hearing. They may possibly get you some remedy, but if not, you get nothing. You don't even get a response in writing. So I'm very wary of that. I like to always file my appeals in writing one way or another, usually by fax.
Using the 211, I just use it to get the correct info if I can't find out who the caseworker is or the email that they're responding to. But yeah, I never rely on that. We always like express notice.
Yeah. My thought about the best way to file an appeal is just to make a photocopy of the notice that you're not happy with, if you have one, and writing across it in big letters, I want to appeal this decision, and faxing it to them. That's perfectly adequate. Now, there are cases, as Darrell pointed out, where you don't get a notice. You just don't get your food stamps this month. Well, okay, you can still appeal that, but you're going to have to do something in writing. Doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be in English, doesn't have to be typed. There's no notarization requirement. Filing an appeal should be very, very simple. And anytime you say something saying that you want to appeal, that definitely is an appeal. Even if you just did it verbally, the problem is you don't have proof. But certainly if you do it on paper and fax it into them so you have proof, that counts as an appeal.
Yes,
Jeff, you're on mute. Sorry, Jeff, you were muted. Let's see, how did that happen? How do we unmute you here?
I think I unmuted myself. Do you want to talk about Snapcap a little bit? Because that's a special program for people who are at least 50 years old and getting SSI. And it has different rules from the regular food stamp program, in many ways advantageous rules. It's a very simple application, 1 page as opposed to 32, I think, is the current food stamp application. It's very simple, and you either get $55 or $125, depending on whether your household costs, I didn't say income, your household costs like rent and utility bills together amount to more than $440 per month. If your household costs are over $440, you get $125. Another interesting thing about Snapcap is that it is always for one individual person. The normal rules about who has to be part of a household do not apply. So if grandma gets Snapcap and lives with her grandchildren, they're on a separate case. And in many cases, even like for older couples where one or both of them is getting SSI, the maximum amount of SSI comes with one of them getting Snapcap and the other one getting food stamps. I mean, regular SNAP. One thing that I want to point out also is that starting in April, there's a rule because of the COVID crisis that anyone who gets any amount of SNAP gets the maximum amount for their household size. So the maximum amount for one person is $204. Such a person often gets a notice and gets real irate about it that says you're only eligible for $16 in food stamps. And that may be a correct calculation. But if they're eligible for food for $16, they get the $204 for one person. Okay? For whatever size household they are, they get the maximum amount for that household size. So our food stamp estimator is not quite as useful these days. It's mainly useful just for seeing, does somebody qualify at all? Because if they do, the amount they're going to get is that maximum household limit. This rule has been extended month by month for the past several months. So it is in effect in November. We assume that it will be in effect in December, but they have not announced that yet.
Okay.
We
We'd like to
don't
say
know when
thank
that
you
rule.
to everybody that watched in attendance here and in the future. And it was our pleasure bringing you this information.
And if you do one of these cases, please feel free to consult with us. We'd be happy to help you in any way that we can.
And Jeff and Darrell, before we let y'all go, and I know everyone watching needs to step back to work too. I did just want to ask on behalf of a HYLA member watching really quickly, still under the sort of admin law umbrella, we had someone ask about the appeals process under the Texas Workforce Commission. If you have to leave, no worries.
No, I was just trying to leave the end so there's a pause so that she can.
Yeah.
No problem. Yeah.
Well,
no.
The appeals process is actually for TWC is similar, but not exactly the same. For TWC, it's very easy, again, to file an appeal. You just send them something saying, I want to appeal this decision. You want to be very careful. You want to make sure that your notice gives them the name and the social security number or case number, better yet, of the case. So again, just taking the notice and writing, I want to appeal this decision on it is a perfectly good way of filing the appeal. At that point, you will get a notice. They're being very backlogged these days. It's taking months for them to set up appeals, whereas normally it's a question of a couple of weeks. But because of the millions of people applying for unemployment in Texas, I think it's really literally millions. They're very backlogged, but eventually you will get a package that includes the notice of how to call in for the hearing. It's a telephone hearing, like the food stamp hearing. But in this case, you have to call in beforehand or register beforehand online. And then having done that, they call you at the phone number you've given. Whereas with food stamps, you just call in and get on the conference call. Again, you can submit additional documents if you want by just sending them to the hearing officer and to the other side, because in TWC cases, there is an employer, usually the other side. So you want to send your documents to the other side as well before the hearing. As part of your packet, you get a page numbered package of exhibits that includes all the evidence from their file that is relevant. It includes their notes about interviewing the client, their notes about interviewing the employer, any documents submitted by either side, their notes about how they decided this case, and copies of any relevant decisions that they relied on. So you look at this packet very carefully. It tells you the whole story right there. And then you do this telephone hearing. And they're again, not very difficult to do. In my view, we frequently win them. You can be represented by an attorney. You don't have to be. One interesting thing about TWC hearings is that you can invoke the rule. And the hearing officers know what that means. Often it's very confusing to some poor employer who doesn't know what in the world you're talking about. And I usually take great delight in doing that to them. Is that a little unfair? I don't know. I assume people know what I mean by invoking the rule. If there are several people in the hearing, you can limit who's taking part at any given time.
Right.
And one thing that I usually try to impress on my clients is that the only issue in the TWC hearing is not whether the employer is a nice guy. It's not whether you need the money. The only issue in most cases is whether you quit voluntarily without good cause connected with the work, or were you fired because of misconduct. Those are two ways that you very frequently are not eligible for unemployment. You can also be ineligible if you don't have enough work history, although there's special unemployment now for the pandemic that doesn't require any work history at all. Somebody not reported by paying taxes. I mean, you can be a self-employed gig worker, you can be a stay-at-home mother or dad who has no work history reported by paying taxes and nevertheless get pandemic unemployment during this pandemic period. And that's a whole nother game, and we could have a whole long discussion. And if somebody wants to call me, I'd be happy to talk to them about it. I mean, I'm very open to discussions with other people, so long as it doesn't take too long. I can sort of fit that into the category of professional courtesy. And as you can tell, I sort of like to talk to people.
I do too. No worries. I really, on behalf of Miriam and the Generation Generosity Committee and all of HYLA, we really do thank you and Jeff and Darrell for your time this afternoon to talk about this important subject matter. Something that we talked about earlier this week, Thanksgiving is next week, and there are a lot of families in Houston and around the country who want to provide a special day for their families and their children, and being able to navigate through these food assistant programs is a big part of that. So thank you for educating us on this. I know there's much more to talk about, but what we can do with those who attended is we can connect them with the two of you and the Lone Star Legal Aid pro bono unit, so they know if they want to take on a case or kind of walk side by side with you and helping with the case. We can make that connection, because I think we now that we have this knowledge, we want to see how we can be of help. So thank you all again. Really, this was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Y'all
we enjoyed it. We
Yes,
we would like to come back at some point. We do a lot of other stuff, so maybe come back and do a Social Security disability discussion, which would be
I'd
good.
love that. That'd be great.
Sure.
Yes, please. Let's keep in touch. That'd be fantastic. Okay. All right, y'all. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for watching. Have a good weekend and happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks, Annette. Bye, Mariam.
Thank
Hi,
you so
Darrell.
much.
Bye.
Bye.